The wet May morning of 2002 began with an unusual stir on Maplewood Avenue, Athens, Georgia. 6 unmarked police cars quietly parked in front of an old mobile home where weeds covered the yard and a rusted license plate hung. Neighbors peeked through curtains as officers in tactical gear spread out around the property, blue and red lights flashing in the early mist. Inside, Daniel Lee Harris, 59, was pouring coffee, a habit he'd kept through years of working as a maintenance man at the local church. A sharp, rapid knock came at 5:10 a.m. "Mr. Harris, Georgia State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding the Mary Ellen Carter case from 1975. An officer later recalled that the man's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee mug, but his eyes remained eerily calm, as if he'd known this day would come and had been waiting for it for nearly 3 decades. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. Athens, Georgia. Morning of July 17, 1975. The small southern town was still cloaked in dew, with moss-covered eaves and pine trees standing still under a pale, ashen sky. This was a place where people rarely locked their doors, where everyone knew each other, where crime existed only in radio reports from distant cities. Mary Ellen Carter, 29, a preschool teacher at St. Luke's Church, lived with her 2 young children in a pale yellow wooden house at the end of Pine Grove Avenue. She was a gentle woman, always up early, watering flowers before sunrise. Her husband, Thomas, was working in Macon, nearly 100 miles away, coming home only on weekends. That morning, Edna Walker, the neighbor across the street, was brewing coffee while glancing at the Carter yard. The front door was slightly ajar, curtains swayed gently, and the kitchen radio played scattered rain forecasts. But what caught her attention was the silence, no children's voices, no whistling kettle, no Mary Ellen's usual laughter. A cold premonition crept into her chest. Edna stepped onto her porch, calling out, "Mary, you up yet?" Only the hum of cicadas answered. Hesitant, she crossed the gravel road, her rubber slippers crunching on the wet ground. The door was unlocked, swinging open lightly. "Mary?" she called again, voice trembling. The smell of stale coffee and wilted roses hung heavy in the air. Inside, the kitchen was a mess. A porcelain cup sat half full on the table, the morning paper still folded. From the bedroom came a faint sound, like something falling. Edna hesitated, then slowly walked down the hallway. At the bedroom door, dim light filtered through parted curtains, and she saw Mary lying motionless on the bed, half covered by a blanket, hair disheveled, hand dangling toward the floor. Edna froze, her heart squeezed tight. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, only stumbling backward, muttering, "Lord." "Mary?" No response, just a thick silence enveloping the house. She ran out, nearly tripping on the porch steps, and rushed to her own home, hands shaking as she dialed the phone. "Sheriff's office?" Her voice broke. "I think something terrible's happened at the Carters." The dispatcher asked something, but Edna couldn't hear anymore. The phone's ringing echoed in her head, long and cold, blending with her racing heartbeat, marking the start of a morning Athens would never forget. Less than 5 minutes later, the first siren wailed from the end of the street. Blue and red lights swept through foggy windows, waking the quiet neighborhood. Sheriff Wes Grant was the first to step out of a patrol car, his boots sinking into the damp ground. Born in Athens, he knew every street, every house, and Mary Ellen Carter was no stranger. He remembered her, singing in the St. Luke's choir, eyes bright and laugh soft. Now, before him stood the yellow-painted house, with its door wide open, curtains swaying as if carrying the last breath of a peace that had vanished. Edna Walker stood huddled on her porch, face pale, clutching a water-stained apron. "I just wanted to check if anyone was home. Then I saw." She choked, pointing toward the door. Grant nodded, signaled to 2 officers, and slowly crossed the threshold. The kitchen was the first thing he saw, tidy, clean, but lifeless. On the table, a half-empty porcelain cup of cold coffee, an unopened morning paper, a radio in the corner, still droning news mixed with the sound of curtains brushing the frame. No signs of a break-in, no disturbed furniture. It was as if time had frozen mid-morning, then someone had snuffed out life with a single, simple act. Grant motioned for Officer Patrick Holmes to head down the hallway. They paused at the bedroom door, slightly ajar, with early light streaming through a gap in the curtains, illuminating the wooden floor. When Holmes nudged it open, the room unfolded in a chilling stillness. Mary Ellen lay face down on the bed, hair spilled out, half her body under a blanket, neck tightly bound by a white clothesline cord. One end was knotted around the bedpost. Her left hand hung limp toward the floor, fingertips nearly touching the rug. Grant stood silent for a few seconds, hearing only the ticking of a living room clock. "Clear the house," he said softly. The other two officers fanned out, checking each room. Minutes later, hurried footsteps. "Chief, the two kids are in the next room. One's still asleep. The older one's awake, panicked but unharmed." Grant closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and ordered, "Get them to the car. Don't let them see their mother." He paced the room, eyes lingering on details, wrinkled sheets, a flipped slipper under the bed, a faint, muddy mark on the floor. A red thread caught on the blanket's edge. The window's inner lock was still secure. No signs of a struggle. No missing items. Mary's wallet and jewelry sat neatly on the nightstand. A murder not driven by theft, and that made it all the more terrifying. As the sun rose over the tree line, Athens' noon light bathed Pine Grove Avenue, turning the small cream-colored house into the center of attention. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's forensic team arrived, bringing cameras, evidence bags, and measuring tools. Doors creaked. Cameras clicked in the silent house, mixed with the scratch of pencils on notepads. No one spoke loudly, only hushed, precise exchanges, the cold rhythm of those too familiar with death's scent. Sheriff Wes Grant leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching every move. He knew from this moment, every detail, no matter how small, could be the only voice of a night's crime. The first technician knelt by the bed, carefully removing the white cotton clothesline from Mary Ellen's neck. "Cotton," he said softly. "Common type, sold anywhere. Bloodstains, and here." He used tweezers to lift a fine strand of hair, glinting under the flash. Grant saw it was dark brown, unlike the victim's. "Bag it separately," he instructed. Voice low and hoarse. On the floor, another technician placed a ruler beside a faint muddy mark near the bed's foot. Under angled light, a shoe print emerged. Men's size, wide sole, athletic, or gardening shoe pattern. Possibly size 10 or 11. The mud trailed from the bed to the door, stopping at the porch. No drag marks, meaning the victim died in place, unmoved. Grant jotted notes, his gaze briefly catching Mary's flipped slipper, a simple image that choked him with unease. Across the room, Technician Monroe carefully picked up a tiny object from the wrinkled sheet, a coarse red fiber, likely from a sports shirt. "Doesn't match the victim's clothing," she said. The evidence went into a sealed envelope, labeled #3. Everything was done in silence, only the click of cameras, rustle of plastic bags, and flashes of light, capturing each frame. In the kitchen, Grant studied Mary's porcelain cup on the table. A faint lipstick mark lingered on the rim, the coffee cold, but the cup's base still faintly warm to the touch. She was alive past 11 p.m., when the living room clock had stopped. 11:34, its second hand frozen between ticks, as if halted by death itself. He checked the nearby outlet, no signs of tampering or electrical issues. The clock likely fell from a bump, but no clear signs of a struggle. A technician handed him a clear plastic bag containing a small glass vial, collected from the sheet near the victim's upper body. "Unidentified fluid sample," he said evenly. "I'll send it to Augusta for analysis. Could be useful later." Grant nodded, unaware that this tiny sample would sit in storage for nearly 3 decades, only to one day speak the truth. Windows and the front door showed no pry marks, no scratches, no forced entry. Inner locks were intact, windows shut tight, only the front door slightly ajar, as if someone left calmly, unhurried. "Not a burglary," Grant muttered. She knew him, or at least, she didn't fear him. The preliminary report noted, no stolen property, wallet intact in a drawer, jewelry untouched. A family photo on the nightstand was tilted, likely from a light bump. In it, Mary Ellen and her 2 children smiled brightly in a flower garden. Thomas Carter behind them, hand on his wife's shoulder. Grant stared at the photo longer than necessary, his eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and anger. In the backyard, forensics found more matching shoe prints in the red dirt, not fully dried. They led to a wooden fence, where another red fiber was caught. No drag marks, no blood, no foreign objects. They photographed, collected, and sealed. The next noon, Clark County's medical van left Athens, carrying Mary Ellen Carter's body to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's forensic lab in Augusta, where Dr. Carol Keaton, the chief medical examiner with nearly 20 years of experience, awaited. Known for her obsessive precision, she noted every scratch, every hair in her neat, rounded handwriting. As the gurney rolled into the cold room, Keaton said softly, "Open case file 4775C. The autopsy room was flooded with white light. The smell of formalin and cold metal hung in the air. Mary Ellen lay still under a white sheet, her face strangely serene. Outside the glass doors, July's heat raged, but here, only the silence of death prevailed." Dr. Keaton removed fresh gloves, glancing at the clock. 2:15 p.m. Begin. Her assistant noted the time as she lifted the sheet from the victim's neck. The white cotton clothesline had left a deep mark, the clear cause of asphyxiation. "Not manual strangulation," Keaton said. "The ligature mark is horizontal, no angle deviation. Strong pull from behind." She pointed to 2 small bruises on either side of the jaw, where the cord had rubbed before the victim lost consciousness. No fractured hyoid bone, indicating death was swift, within a minute or less. Mary's right hand had a thin scratch, less than an inch, with tiny white fibers under the pinky nail, likely from trying to claw at the cord in a final, desperate act. No foreign skin under the nails. No struggle, Keaton noted. The victim was fully subdued. Examining the abdomen and chest, Keaton saw pale, unbruised skin. But under UV light on the thighs, biological traces appeared, clearly not the victim's. Later tests confirmed semen, yet disturbingly, the uterus and vaginal tissue showed no inflammation, meaning the assault occurred after death. "Post-mortem sexual assault," Keaton said, her voice cold as metal. She looked up, gray eyes expressionless. For her, such cases left deeper emotional scars than any gore. She opened the abdominal cavity, noting normal organs, no toxins in the stomach, no signs of drugging. Time of death, based on liver temperature, rigor mortis, and blood breakdown, was around 11:30 p.m. on July 16, hours before Edna saw the open door. Keaton's hands didn't tremble as she took tissue samples from the throat, the skin around the ligature mark, and placed them in glass vials with formalin. "Label and seal," she told her assistant. All were meticulously tagged: Carter, Mary Ellen, evidence sample A to F. At the end, she re-examined the neck. Under the light, tiny pinpoint bruises appeared around the chin and lips, classic signs of the victim's mouth being covered during the attack. "Possibly a hand or cloth," she said. The killer wanted absolute silence. After 3 hours, Keaton removed her gloves, exhaling deeply. She returned to her desk, typing a preliminary report on an old Olympia typewriter. Each key struck like a dry hammer in the cold room. Cause of death: asphyxia due to ligature strangulation. Time of death: approximately 23:30, July 16, 1975. Condition of body: evidence of post-mortem sexual assault. No evidence of significant struggle or resistance. She paused at the last line, glancing at the tray of small vials holding tissue, fluid, hair, and epithelial cells. Per new state protocol, all samples were to be stored for at least 30 years in the GBI's cold storage. "Place in preservation box 19, she told the evidence clerk, unaware that this meticulous act would spark justice nearly 3 decades later. As the gurney was wheeled back to storage, Augusta's afternoon light filtered through the window, falling on the white sheet covering Mary's body. Keaton removed her mask, standing still for a moment. She wasn't a random victim, she said softly, as if to herself. Someone knew her well, knew her routine, and chose that night to come. That evening, the typed report was sealed in a brown envelope, sent to GBI headquarters in Atlanta. She signed it, stamped it July 18, 1975, and placed it in the outgoing tray. As the autopsy room's lights dimmed, only the steady hum of the air conditioner remained, preserving the evidence of that night in ice, waiting for the day it would be called forth. 2 days after the autopsy report arrived from Augusta, Sheriff Wes Grant held the first investigative meeting at the Clark County office. On the table, crime scene photos were spread out: the white clothesline, muddy shoe prints, the porcelain cup with a faint lipstick mark. He lit a cigarette, silent for a long moment before speaking. If it's not a burglary, if there's no struggle, the killer was someone Mary trusted. We start with those closest to her. And in that list, 2 names stood out: Thomas Carter, her husband, and Daniel "Danny" Harris, her brother-in-law. Thomas Carter, 33, a construction engineer in Macon, about 90 miles from Athens, was a quiet, reserved man, described by coworkers as tidy to the point of boring. The night of the murder, he was at the workers' housing for an Interstate 16 project, sharing a room with 3 other engineers. At 9:30 p.m., he called home, but got no answer. A small detail that haunted him for the rest of his life. "I thought she was bathing or putting the kids to bed," he said during questioning, his voice hoarse, hands clasped, eyes red from sleeplessness. Grant sat across, asking slowly, "When was the last time you left Macon before that?" "Sunday afternoon. I planned to return to Athens this Friday. She was fine. We talked that night. Nothing unusual." Officers checked the project's phone log. A call was made from the Macon landline at 9:32 p.m. 3 coworkers confirmed Thomas was there all evening, watching a baseball game on TV. No physical evidence in Mary's house matched his fingerprints or hair beyond what was expected from a family member. The report noted, no conclusive evidence to rule him out, but a credible alibi. Thomas was released after 48 hours of questioning, his face haunting the station, pale, hollow, as if his soul had been carved out. The second name, Daniel Harris, unsettled Grant from the moment it was mentioned. At 34, Harris was a former Marine, discharged in 1971 for uncontrolled violent behavior. His record showed 2 warnings for bar fights. After the war, he spiraled, jobless, divorced, living alone in a mobile home in rural Jefferson, about 15 miles from Athens. Harris was Mary Ellen's brother-in-law, husband to her sister Linda, but even after their divorce, he occasionally helped the Carters with electrical repairs, light bulb changes, or watching the kids when Thomas was away. "A good guy but unpredictable," a neighbor once said. Grant and Detective Holmes visited his mobile home on the afternoon of July 20th. The scene was bleak: scattered beer cans, an old radio playing country music, a shotgun loosely hung on the wall. Harris sat on the steps, wearing boots, smoking. Seeing them, he squinted, smirking slightly. "Guess I know why you're here." In the interrogation room, he spoke calmly, almost rehearsed. "That night, I was at the Copper Lantern, about 8 till midnight. Had a few drinks with friends, then went home to sleep." Grant asked, "Anyone confirm that?" "Sure, the bartender or the guys at the corner table." But when police checked, the bar owner, Clyde Roper, shook his head. "I know Danny, but he wasn't there that night. If he was, I'd remember." Another server confirmed the evening was slow, with no Harris on any receipts. What piqued Grant's interest was the neighbor's statement from across the Carter house. "Around midnight, I saw a brown Ford parked near the corner," she said. "I remember because its lights flashed a few times, then went off. I thought someone was looking for an address. By morning, I saw tire marks in the yard." When pressed, she added, "I'm not sure who drove, but it looked just like Mr. Harris's truck." Grant had it checked. Harris owned a 1968 Ford F-100, Dark brown license plate 4J716. They compared the tire marks to those in the Carter yard, similar pattern, but not clear enough to confirm. No blood or matching fibers were found in the truck. His fingerprints were in the Carter house, unsurprising given his visits, so they couldn't be used to convict. Harris cooperated, but his eyes held a mix of mockery and defiance. "You think I'd do that to my sister-in-law?" he asked, laughing dryly. "I may be rough, but I'm not crazy." Grant didn't reply, staring at him long before signaling Holmes to stop recording. "If I find anything, even the smallest thing, I'll be back," he said, leaving. Harris shrugged. "I'm right here. Go ahead and try." Throughout the following week, the police scrambled for more evidence, checking the truck, sampling dirt from its undercarriage, comparing it to mud from the scene. Results came back negative. No matching hair samples, no unfamiliar fingerprints. Grant hated this feeling. The case screamed of a crime by someone familiar. Yet every lid ended in a dead end. The final report he signed and sent to GBI Atlanta on July 24, 1975, stated clearly, Thomas Carter, credible alibi verified. Daniel Harris, possible connection, insufficient physical evidence. Case remains open pending additional leads. That night, as Grant left the station, a heavy rain fell over Athens. He stood on the porch, watching water wash mud from the road, leaving the pavement clean as if nothing had ever happened here. But he knew some stains could never be washed away. They were merely hidden, waiting for the day they'd rise to the surface. A week after Daniel Harris was released, the Mary Ellen Carter case was still stalled. Sheriff Wes Grant sat in his office, facing a thick report full of half-conclusions, insufficient physical evidence, reasonable alibi, unidentified sample. Each line felt like a dull blade hacking at his patience. Athens was so small that anyone could recount another's morning in detail, yet the night Mary was killed, the town seemed to suffer a collective memory lapse. Grant knew if they didn't broaden the investigation, the case would soon fade into silence, like countless files he'd seen relegated to storage. He started over, this time focusing on social connections. Police knocked on the doors of everyone Mary might have known. Teachers at her school, parents of her students, church group friends. All were shocked. All said variations of the same thing. Mary was so kind. She had no enemies. It must have been a mistake. No one had a satisfying explanation. Among the statements, one made Grant pause his pen. Alice Denham, a parent of one of Mary's preschool students, said that 3 days before the murder, she saw a strange man standing outside the fence of St. Luke's playground. "I remember because it was so hot, yet he wore a dark red sports jacket," Alice said, her voice low. "He stood there, hands in pockets, staring through the fence for a few minutes before leaving. When asked if she saw his face, she shook her head. Not clearly, dark hair, maybe in his 30s, with a goatee. I thought he was a parent." Grant had his team check the list of visitors to the school that week. Milk delivery, electricians, newspaper carriers, none matched the description. They also combed through motel and boarding house records around Athens, looking for anyone who arrived and left before July 16th. Nothing. Not a single name with a violent record or link to the victim. Meanwhile, the state crime lab sent back results on the red fiber from the scene. The 2-page technical report boiled down to one line that made Grant slam his pen on the desk. Fiber sample, polyester cotton blend. Common athletic fabric, mass-produced by Champion since 1973. Specific source, untraceable. In other words, useless. Any man within 100 miles could own such a shirt. Detective Holmes suggested investigating the construction workers at Thomas's project. Perhaps someone visited Mary while her husband was away, but attendance logs were airtight. No one left the site on the night of July 16th. A few workers called in for questioning, laughed tiredly. "We worked late, just wanted to sleep." You think we had the energy to drive out and kill someone? By late July, Grant realized the investigation had gone in a full circle. They were back at square one, no suspects, no motive, no new leads. He reread Dr. Keaton's autopsy report, lingering on the final line. Victim knew the assailant. It echoed in his mind. If Mary knew the killer, she must have let him into the house without suspicion. But who among her acquaintances could do this? One afternoon, Grant returned to the scene with Officer Holmes. The Pine Grove house was sealed, grass grown knee-high. He stood on the porch, peering through a dusty window. In the silence, he tried to reconstruct it. Mary comes home after putting the kids to bed, reads the paper, listens to the radio. A soft knock. She opens the door. Who was it? An old friend? Someone unexpected? The door opens, they talk briefly. Then darkness falls. All that remains is the clock stopped at 11:34. Holmes broke his thoughts with a quiet voice. Could be someone from the church group, or a former classmate. Women like her trust people easily. Grant didn't reply. He knew Holmes was right, but empty theories only frustrated him more. The next day, another report came from GBI Atlanta. No unknown fingerprints, no identifiable DNA. Everything hung on possibilities. That night, Grant sat alone in his office. The desk lamp illuminating the evidence box, the white clothesline, the red fiber, a photo of the muddy print. He gently lifted the lid, staring at the silent objects. They seemed to hold their own secrets, refusing to speak. In the weeks that followed, the Georgia State Crime Lab kept working on the scant samples from Pine Grove. Sheriff Wes Grant knew they were doing their best. But each time the phone rang from Augusta, he felt a quiet dread, fear that the other end would deliver the familiar line. Not enough data to identify. And sure enough, in August 1975, the official forensic report arrived in Athens, neat, cold, and hopeless. The summary stated, fluid sample from the victim's bedsheet, identified as blood type O. No signs of poisoning or sedatives. Grant frowned at that line. Type O was the most common blood type. Nearly half of Georgia's population shared it. It revealed nothing, narrowed no suspects, opened no new paths. To them, it was practically useless. Who around here doesn't have type O? Detective Holmes muttered heavily, slumping into a chair. Next came the fingerprint results. The lab had collected 42 indistinct prints from the Carter house, most blurred or overlapped from family police or medics moving through. The two most viable prints, from the bedroom doorknob and kitchen table, were run through the state's criminal database. The result was curt. No match found. No hits in any Georgia criminal records. In 1975, that was nearly the end of investigative technology. No DNA, no security cameras, no automated recordings, just blood, prints, and instinct. And instinct wasn't enough for court. Grant read the report 3 times, then set it down, staring out the window. Outside, old oak trees blocked the afternoon light. He felt like he was peering into a murky abyss, swallowing every human effort. If we live another 20 years, he told Holmes, maybe technology will speak for us. But not now. Holmes flipped through the file, pointing to the end. The hair from the clothesline, they said, it's from a male, but they can't test it further. Just that it doesn't match the husband or any family. Grant nodded, exhaling, meaning none of our suspects. That closed their last fragile hope. Within the Athens Police Department, a short memo circulated, internal memorandum. August 29, 1975 subject. Case hash 4775C, summary of forensic analysis. Biological sample, blood type O, inconclusive latent fingerprints, no viable match trace fiber. Common textile, indeterminate source. Conclusion: insufficient forensic technology to continue active investigation. Case status: suspended pending future developments. Grant read it at the end of his shift, when everyone else had left. He folded it, tucked it into the main file, and wrote a single red ink line, not sent to anyone, just to remind himself, there is a killer. We're just not yet able to hear him speak. That night, he returned to Pine Grove alone. The Carter house was sealed, yellow tape fluttering in the wind. He stood by the fence, looking through the window, now just a void of darkness, but in his mind, every detail lived: the white clothesline, the muddy print, the clock frozen at 11:34, all waiting for someone skilled enough to touch and awaken them. The next morning, The case file was sent to GBI Atlanta's archive. The evidence box, labeled Carter, Maine, Homicide 1975, was placed on a shelf among hundreds of others. The metal door closed with a hollow clang. An era of investigation ended with it, an era where justice relied on the naked eye, and a person's fate could be buried simply because science wasn't mature enough to answer. For Wes Grant, it was the most painful failure of his career, but he told himself it would come back somehow. Those mute objects, hair, fluid, mud, would find their voice. He just didn't know the world would wait nearly 30 years to hear them. In October 1975, autumn draped Athens earlier than usual. Oak leaves turned golden. Pine Grove's green canopy now revealed cold gaps, and the Carter family's pale yellow house stood silent behind silver ceiling tape. A forgotten Athens banner herald fluttered on Edna Walker's porch steps. Page 3, in small italicized print, just noticeable to those still caring. Police have no suspects in the murder of local teacher Mary Ellen Carter. A brief sentence closed the storm of 3 months' investigation, as dry and indifferent as if it were a mere accident report. Sheriff Wes Grant read it in his office as rain pattered on the oak trees outside. He'd expected this, not because he wanted it, but because he knew it was inevitable. The final GBI memo confirmed no new evidence, no chargeable suspects, all analyses at their technical limits. The case was classified as an inactive investigation. In the state system, that meant cold case. Grant stared at the towering file stack, his eyes pausing on a photo of Mary Ellen from last Christmas. She was beaming, her 2 kids wrapped around her neck, a lit-up tree behind. He folded the photo, tucked it between report pages, and whispered, like an apology, "Girl, I tried my best." The Carter family had no reason to stay in Athens. Thomas Carter, still quietly suspected despite his proven alibi, moved to Macon with his parents, taking his 2 young children. On his way out of town, he stopped by the station once, saying little, just shaking Grant's hand firmly. "If you ever find who did this," he said, voice hoarse, "call me, no matter where I am." Grant nodded, but knew deep down that promise might never come true. The Athens community, after months of uproar, let the story slip into oblivion. People still mention Mary as the teacher who was killed when passing that road, but only in whispers, as if afraid to stir something dark. The Carter house went up for sale, unclaimed. A year later, grass smothered the porch, windows shattered, only faded yellow tape dangling in the wind. In December that year, Wes Grant filed for early retirement. After 32 years in the force, seeing every kind of crime, Mary Ellen's case was the only one that made him feel defeated. "They say time helps you forget, but I know some things just lie dormant, never gone," he wrote in his resignation letter to the Clark County Sheriff's Office. Before leaving, he personally delivered the case file to GBI Atlanta. Not through a courier, not delegated. That late afternoon, he stood in GBI's archive, a cold, long room filled with metal shelves packed with sealed case boxes. Each held an unfinished story, a name without closure. A young technician greeted him at the door, holding a transfer receipt, voice flat. "Carter, Mary Ellen, case 4775C, stored in Section D. Retention, indefinite." Grant nodded, slowly placing the box on the shelf. Inside that box, beyond the thick report, were carefully sealed pieces of evidence. The white clothesline, the red fiber, photos of shoe prints, and a small glass vial with a biological sample. Under fluorescent light, the evidence label's numbers glinted faintly. No one in that room knew that tiny vial, dismissed as nearly useless, would be the key to bringing the case back to light, nearly 3 decades later. As the archive door closed behind him, its echo rang through the empty hallway. Grant paused, glancing through a small window at hundreds of boxes stacked, names faded by time's dust. "Carter, Maine," handwritten by him, still fresh. He whispered, as if to himself, "Sleep well, Mary. One day someone will wake you up." Then he turned, his aging figure fading into the hallway's dim light. Outside, dusk fell over Atlanta, and in the cold archive, the air conditioner's hum kept those silent pieces of evidence alive, waiting for science to grow strong enough to hear their story. At that moment, no one knew, but the sealed box labeled Carter, Maine, had just become one of Georgia's oldest cold cases, and one day it would speak again. By the late 1980s, nearly 13 years after the Mary Ellen Carter case was shelved, as no further leads, Daniel Harris's name resurfaced, not in a murder file, but in a minor assault case in Gainesville, a 2-hour drive from Athens. The city had changed, new highways, roadside bars sprouting up, and the former Marine was now a faded shadow of himself. He lived alone in an old mobile home, working odd jobs at mechanic shops, drinking heavily, and rarely speaking to neighbors. One September evening in 1988, after a drunken argument with his girlfriend, a bar worker named Brenda Lovett, Harris was accused of attacking her. Police found Brenda with a bruised face, saying, "He choked me," then walked off like it was nothing. When officers arrived, Harris was on his porch, cigarette between fingers, eyes vacant. "I didn't kill anyone," he said, voice raspy. "I just lost control a bit." He was arrested that night for simple assault. Under Georgia's 1987 law, all inmates, even for minor crimes, had to provide blood and saliva samples for the state's biometric database. DNA technology was still a luxury for most labs, but the new rule required samples in case science advances. Harris gave his samples in Hall County Jail, unaware that those few drops of blood and saliva would become the fateful thread tying him to a past he thought buried. The assault case ended quickly. Brenda refused to testify, wanting only to stay away from him. Harris got 18 months. In prison, he was a quiet inmate, causing no trouble, described as strangely calm. When asked about his military past, he said, "Only too much noise in my head already. I want silence." Released early in 1990 for good behavior, Harris didn't return to Jefferson, but moved to Gainesville, renting a small room behind a Baptist church. The local pastor, unaware of his history, gave him a job maintaining the grounds. Harris mowed lawns, fixed roofs, cleaned windows, and rarely spoke beyond a morning greeting. People saw him reading the Bible every Sunday afternoon, his demeanor quiet, even gentle. To the Gainesville community, Daniel Harris was just the church handyman, a solitary, middle-aged man, reserved and overly tidy. No one knew the hands that once gripped a cord around a woman's neck in 1975 were now sweeping leaves and polishing church floors. In Athens, the Carter case had sunk into oblivion. Younger officers hadn't even heard the name. Wes Grant, retired nearly a decade, lived in a small house by the forest's edge, still writing occasional letters to the Clark County Sheriff's Office, asking if anyone had revisited old files. Most went unanswered. Everyone believed Mary Ellen Carter was just another forgotten victim of a pre-DNA era, a name lost among thousands of unsolved cases. Harris, the man who sat in that interrogation room years ago, eyes calm, voice steady, had become a faint memory to those still alive. No one mentioned him. No one recalled he was ever a suspect. In GBI Atlanta's frigid archive, the Carter, Maine box sat untouched on its shelf among hundreds of others. Dust coated the label. Wes Grant's handwriting faded by time. But inside, the small glass vial with the biological sample remained intact, the silent evidence waiting for science to name the man who slipped away from Athens in the summer night of 1975. Back then, Daniel Harris had forgotten his own voice from that night, and believed, like others, that the past was buried forever. But fate, like justice, only sleeps, it never forgets. In 2001, nearly 3 decades after Mary Ellen Carter's murder, Georgia saw a shift in criminal investigation. DNA technology was no longer a concept in science journals, but a practical tool, reshaping how humanity faced crime. At GBI headquarters in Atlanta, a new project launched, the Cold Case Review Unit, tasked with re-examining unsolved cases from the last century. Their goal was clear: bring modern science to victims their era couldn't protect. Claire Donovan, then 33, was among the youngest investigators recruited to the initial team. A graduate of the State Police Academy, with a focus on forensic biology, She'd spent 3 years in Savannah's Violent Crimes Unit. Claire chose this path, not out of ambition, but personal obsession. Her father, a former Augusta sheriff, died carrying the regret of an unsolved case. "No case is truly closed," he'd said, "just waiting for science to open it." At the team's first meeting, the GBI director laid out lists of unresolved cases, missing persons, serial killings, hundreds of victims dust-covered by time. Claire didn't pick a famous case. Her eyes stopped on a handwritten name, the ink-browned, Carter, Mary Ellen, homicide, Athens, 1975. Next to it was a brief note from retired Sheriff Wes Grant. Victim likely knew the assailant. No closure. She read that line repeatedly, then decided this would be her first case. A single murder, no ties to gangs or complex politics, just an ordinary woman and a killer who vanished into the night. A case like thousands, but to Claire, it felt unfinished. On June 12, 2001, she visited GBI's evidence archive. The clerk, a silver-haired man named Nolan, opened the cold storage and entered the code 4775C. A dusty cardboard box was pulled from the shelf, a thin layer of dust rising as he set it on a metal table. 30 years, no one's touched this, Nolan said, voice tinged with surprise. Claire untied the string, lifted the lid. Inside, everything was astonishingly organized. The white cotton clothesline coiled in a brown paper bag, an envelope with the red fiber, faded crime scene photos, and in the corner, a small glass vial wrapped in cotton. Labeled in Dr. Carol Keaton's handwriting, biological sample, case M. E. Carter, July 17, 75. Claire held the vial to the light, seeing a dark, amber-like residue inside. "I can't believe they kept it this intact," she said softly. Nolan nodded, half proud, half moved. In Grant and Keaton's time, they worked like someone would look again someday. And look, you're that day. Claire carefully documented the unsealing, photographed the evidence box, and signed the new transfer receipt. The clothesline, fiber, and vial were repackaged separately for the GBI forensic lab in Decatur, where she knew they'd just adopted STR-DNA testing, a new technique that could analyze tiny genetic segments, even from degraded old samples. As she left the archive room, Nolan called after her. "I hope if anyone opens this box again, it's to close it with E. Solved on the cover." Claire turned back, smiling, her eyes both resolute and distant. "I hope so too," she replied. 3 days later, she personally delivered the sample to the lab. The lab director, Dr. Lionel Webb, a renowned DNA expert, greeted her with a firm handshake. "This sample's old, but we can try," he said. "If it was stored properly, there's still hope." Claire opened the envelope, presenting the vial still wrapped in its paper bag, bearing Dr. Keaton's original label and signature. Webb raised an eyebrow, impressed. "She's a legend, and thanks to people like her, we get a chance to do this again." Technicians cut the sample with a sterile blade, extracted it with a micropipette, dissolved it in buffer solution, and loaded it into the DNA extraction machine. Each step was logged in the lab journal. Sample code 4775C-Bio01. Extraction initiated. STR protocol applied. Claire stood watching through the glass, feeling as if the past and present were merging. 1975 and 2001 separated only by a thin pane, a centrifuge's spin. On August 2, 2001, 3 weeks after Claire Donovan sent the sample, an internal email from GBI Forensic Lab. Decatur Division lit up her computer screen. The subject line was cold, clinical, STR results. Case 4775C, positive DNA profile obtained. Claire sat up straight, heart pounding. She opened the attached file. The 7-page report held one line that stole her breath. Viable male DNA profile successfully extracted from biological sample. Sample integrity maintained. Recommendation: submit for CODIS comparison. 30 minutes later, she was at the Decatur lab. Dr. Lionel Webb, who'd half-jokingly doubted the 30-year-old evidence, stood by the gene sequencer. "You won't believe this, Claire," he said, voice tinged with excitement and disbelief. "This sample's practically a miracle. The DNA's intact, clear, undegraded. You know what they stored it in? Cotton craft paper, not plastic. The most old-school preservation, and turns out, the most durable." Claire stared at the screen, where green, red, and yellow bars displayed the STR profile, the genetic signature of an individual. Those seemingly meaningless numbers and symbols were the past's voice, translated by science after nearly 30 years of silence. "Can you build a complete DNA profile?" she asked. Webb nodded. "Done. This sample's strong enough for CODIS." CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, was the FBI's national database, storing millions of DNA profiles from convicts, arrestees, and unidentified samples. Each new profile entered triggered a nationwide scan for matches. One click could collapse 3 decades of silence. That afternoon, Claire stood in the observation room with Webb as a technician, entered the Carter_ME._sample01 profile into the system. She heard the keyboard clicks, the hum of the air conditioner, and then the simplest sound that chilled her. Processing. Comparing profiles. The room fell silent. The screen's light reflected on the faces around her, people peering through a window bridging 2 eras. Then a small beep sounded. The screen displayed a line that everyone read twice to believe. CODIS match found. Offender profile. Harris, Daniel Lee. Match probability. 1 in 17 trillion. No one spoke for a few seconds. Webb broke the silence. "Good Lord. 17 trillion. It can't be random." Claire stood still, eyes fixed on the name on the screen. Daniel Lee Harris. A name faded in the 1975 transcripts, now undeniable in sharp clarity. She said softly, voice steady, 27 years, and it's still there. The room stayed quiet, everyone sensing they'd witnessed something sacred, not a miracle but the patience of justice. Within 2 hours, the DNA report was sent to GBI Atlanta headquarters. The regional director signed an order transferring the file to the Clark County District Attorney's Office to prepare an emergency arrest warrant. Claire didn't leave her office all night. She reopened the old case file, reviewing every page of the 1975 interrogation transcripts. Harris's name appeared under suspect interview with Sheriff Wes Grant's brief note. Denied involvement. No physical evidence available. Alibi unverifiable. She reread it, then underlined. No physical evidence in red pen, writing beside it, now there is. Part of her trembled, not from fear, but emotion. Grant was right. Everything he'd believed, that Mary Ellen knew her killer, that one day science would prove it, had finally come true. The next morning, Claire met with the GBI director. An urgent meeting took place in the 7th floor glass room. "We have a definitive DNA match," she said, spreading the report on the table. Harris Daniel Lee, 1988 offender record, assault charge. His DNA's been in CODIS since 1990. Perfect match with the Carter scene sample. The director looked at her, pensive. "You realize this is a 30-year-old case? If we arrest him, we need to prepare for media and legal scrutiny." Claire replied, "I understand. But we also need to think of that woman. She's waited 30 years for someone to believe justice doesn't expire." The director nodded. "You can contact the Clark County Sheriff's Office. I want him arrested this week." Noon, on August 4, 2001, GBI Atlanta's office glowed with summer sunlight. The air was taut. On Claire Donovan's desk, the Carter Maine file lay open, yellowed pages spread in rows beside a fresh CODIS report with its gleaming logo. 27 years spanned those pages, half faded ink, half genetic data, all slowly aligning. Claire flipped back to the 1975 forensic report. Dr. Carol Keaton's faint stamp read, "Blood trace, typo hair fragment. Medium brown, 2.4 centimeters, consistent with male origin." She opened the 1989 offender file for Daniel Lee Harris, the Gainesville assault. The state crime lab's biological test noted, blood typo hair, medium brown, thick strand pattern. She placed the reports side by side, slowly, as if afraid her heartbeat would disrupt the obvious. Matching blood type, matching hair color, matching strand structure. Not just coincidence. Next, Claire called GBI's Decatur Evidence Archive, requesting the 1975 Carter shoeprint file. Size men's 10, V-shaped sole pattern, characteristic of early Nike Cortez. Cross-referencing the 1988 Harris assault property log, a small note stopped her breath. Item #7, Nike running shoes, size 10, brown stripe, worn. She tapped her pen lightly, muttering, same blood type, same shoes, same hair, and now a perfect DNA match. Every scattered piece of a case thought dead was coming alive, forming the shadow of one man, someone Athens had forgotten. That afternoon, Claire and Captain Harold Denton, Clark County Sheriff's Office commander, visited Edna Walker, now 72, at a nursing home in Watkinsville's outskirts. The small, white-haired woman still recalled that horrific night, clearly. When Claire mentioned the Pine Grove house, Edna's eyes lit up, then dimmed, as if a memory's door had opened. "Teacher Carter," she said, voice trembling but clear. "I was the first to see her. I'll never forget." Claire gently placed a recorder on the table, asking, "Do you remember anything about what happened in the yard or around the house that night?" Edna closed her eyes. "I remember a strange noise in the grass. When I looked out, I saw a truck, an old brown Ford, parked by the fence. I didn't see the license plate, but I remember a long dent on the left side, like it hit a pole. I was going to check, but then I saw the Carter door ajar, and you know the rest." Claire barely breathed. The 1975 report vaguely noted a truck, no specifics on color or dent, but now, Edna's memory, after 27 years, provided the exact piece Claire needed. Back at GBI, she checked old vehicle records under Daniel Lee Harris's name. The data appeared: vehicle Ford F-100, 1973, brown left panel dented, repair estimate filed October 1975. Claire sat still, no more doubts. The truck, the dent, the blood type, the shoes, the hair, all converged on one point, and DNA was the final hammer sealing Pandora's box. She compiled the evidence into a file for the Clark County DA's office. On the morning of August 7th, in a small third-floor meeting room, Chief Prosecutor Douglas Harlan read each page slowly, as if touching history. At the CODIS results, he paused, then looked up at Claire. "A 1 in 17 trillion match. Are you sure of the sample's legality?" "Completely," Claire replied. "Taken per GBI protocol, properly preserved, verified by the Decatur lab. No chance of cross-contamination. And we have a clear chain of evidence linking Harris to the scene: shoe prints, blood type, witness, vehicle records." Harlan leaned back, silent for a moment. "You know, I was a law student in Athens when this happened. I remember the news, that girl, everyone mourned, then time buried it all. Hard to believe justice can still return, even 30 years late." He closed the file, signing the court submission. "By the authority vested in this office," he said firmly, "I approve the request for an arrest warrant. Daniel Lee Harris, prime suspect in the 1975 murder of Mary Ellen Carter." Claire felt her heart tighten. This moment marked the end of the investigation and the start of true justice. She quietly looked at the printed warrant, black ink steady on white paper. State of Georgia. Arrest warrant subject, Daniel Lee Harris. Charge: murder in the first degree. Date of crime, July 16, 1975. That afternoon, leaving the DA's building, Athens saw its first summer rain, after weeks of scorching sun. Claire stood under the awning, feeling the dampness rise from the sidewalk. She recalled Wes Grant's 1982 letter to GBI, found in the old file: "I don't believe evil sleeps forever. It just waits for someone patient enough to name it." Now, that name had been called. For the first time in 27 years, Athens echoed with a familiar sound, not a death knell, but thunder, heralding an awakening. Justice had returned. On August 9, 2001, the arrest warrant was approved. But Claire Donovan knew everything had to be done carefully. After 27 years, they had one shot to get it right. Before acting, GBI needed a second DNA match, directly from Harris's current belongings, to eliminate any legal disputes. The Gainesville Police Department was enlisted to assist. Harris still lived in the mobile home behind the Baptist church where he worked maintenance. The small, rusted tin-roofed home sat hidden behind pines, nearly 2 miles from downtown. Each morning, he woke early, biked to a convenience store for coffee, then returned to sweep the church grounds, so quiet people forgot he existed. Claire and Inspector Mark Hensley from Gainesville PD were tasked with direct surveillance. They set up a post half a mile from Harris's home, inside a gray pickup, with binoculars and a long-range camera. Mission: monitor him for 10 days, collecting anything with DNA. Cigarette butts, cups, cans, any biological trace. Don't let him know, Claire warned. If he senses he's being watched, he'll vanish, and 27 years will mean nothing. Day 1. Harris left his home at 6:45 a.m., wearing faded jeans and a green shirt. He walked to Harper's Stop and Go, bought coffee, smoked a Marlboro Light while waiting. Claire snapped photos. When he left, Hensley approached the trash bin by the store, retrieving a half-smoked cigarette with stainless steel tongs, sealing it in a plastic bag. "One butt," he said, "but it could trade for a lifetime." By day 3, they collected 2 Budweiser cans and a paper coffee cup Harris discarded. Each item was sealed, time-stamped, and stored in a cold container. Over the next days, Harris repeated his routine: work, home, Bible reading, beer, cigarettes. From the outside, he was a harmless loner. But to Claire, his every move carried the shadow of that 1975 house. The hand holding a cigarette could have once tightened a clothesline. On day 10, GBI's lab received the Gainesville samples. Claire was there, watching through glass as technicians began DNA extraction. Each time a vial entered the centrifuge, she felt her heart spin with it. 3 hours later, Dr. Lionel Webb entered, holding a printout. He said little, sliding the paper toward her. 2 parallel genetic sequences lay on the page, one from the 1975 scene, one from the recent cigarette. At the bottom, in bold, DNA match confirmed, probability 1 in 17 trillion. Webb looked at her, eyes heavy yet relieved. "No doubt, Claire, it's the same man." She stood silent, hands gripping the paper. Part of her wanted to rejoice, part felt weighed down. Justice, when late, brought truth and tragedy. The next morning, August 13th, GBI convened with Clark County Sheriff's Office and Gainesville PD to plan the arrest. The third-floor meeting room was lit early. A map of the Baptist church spread on the table, marking every entry and exit. Captain Hensley pointed, "We have 2 approaches, one from the church parking lot, one from the trail behind the mobile home. He has no registered weapons, but he's ex-Marine. Don't underestimate his reflexes." Claire added, "He usually gets coffee at 6:45. That's the best time. No one at the church, no kids, no parishioners. If we want to avoid noise, do it then." The regional director nodded, scanning the room. "We've waited 27 years. Tomorrow morning, end it. Fast, clean, precise." As the meeting ended, Claire stayed behind, staring at the church map. On the paper's corner, she wrote 3 words: "Pine Grove returns," then folded it, tucking it into her jacket. That night, she didn't sleep. Images of Mary Ellen Carter and Harris's aged face intertwined like time's cross-sections. A young woman forever 29, an old man, still carrying a crime he thought had dissolved into the past. Before dawn, as first light touched Gainesville, Claire donned her jacket and stepped out. Outside, the task force was ready. Over the radio, Hensley's voice cut through, firm. "Team 1 in position. Target, leaving house. Prepare to move." And somewhere, amid engine hums and whistling wind, Justice's wheels began turning. Unstoppable this time. At 5:10 a.m., May 6, 2002, Gainesville was shrouded in thick fog. The first rays of sun, barely tinting the Baptist church's roof, where Daniel Lee Harris worked maintenance. The air was damp, cold, silent enough to hear insects buzzing in the grass. On the narrow dirt road to the mobile home, 3 unmarked GBI and Gainesville PD vehicles lined up. Lights off, engines idling low for warmth. In the lead car, Claire Donovan sat beside Captain Mark Hensley, gripping the radio. She peered through the glass. The faded mobile home, old green curtains, a brown Ford truck parked aside. The dent was still there, like a scar from an unhealed memory. Target location confirmed. Team 2's radio crackled. He's awake. Kitchen light on. Hensley nodded, signaling. Team 1, move in. 2 agents in bulletproof vests quietly approached the steps, knocking 3 times on the metal door. Thud, 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 thud. The sound echoed in the damp air, lingering uneasily. No response. 1 second, 2, then the door swung open. Harris appeared in the frame, still in his faded green shirt, holding a steaming coffee mug. He looked at the agents, showing neither fear nor surprise. Flashlights lit his face, etched with deep wrinkles, eyes shadowed but oddly bright. Daniel Lee Harris, Hensley said, voice clear. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of first-degree murder. Mary Ellen Carter case, Athens, 1975. A brief silence. Harris nodded slightly, setting the mug on the doorstep. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. I knew you'd come. No resistance, no questions, no demands for proof. As an agent cuffed him, Harris glanced through the window, where dawn light reflected off a small cross atop the church. Claire stepped forward, keeping 3 meters distance, eyes locked on him. You knew this day would come, she said. Harris shrugged faintly, a ghostly smile flickering. Maybe I knew longer than you think, but I didn't expect to be this old when it caught up. He was escorted to the vehicle, head slightly bowed, hands cuffed behind. As he crossed the foggy yard, his boots sank lightly into the damp earth. Nike running shoes, like the prints found by Athens Lake years ago. The sight chilled Claire's spine. At 5:42 a.m., Harris was placed in the agency vehicle, door slamming shut. Claire watched as the convoy left the church, headlights slicing through the fog like a thin blade. Within an hour, news swept Athens. Local channels aired breaking reports. Arrest in 1975. Murder shocks community. Former suspect Daniel Lee Harris, now 55, taken into custody by GBI in Gainesville early this morning. Newspapers, TV, radio, all revived a story the town thought buried with the 70s. Images of the Pine Grove house reappeared on evening news, mixed with old black and white photos of Mary Ellen Carter. Athens residents, some her former students now with families, were stunned. At a small coffee shop near the university, people whispered, I remember that day. My mom heard the ambulance go by. Who'd have thought he was living right here in the state? Another replied, voice choked, thought justice forgot Athens. At GBI headquarters, Claire Donovan sat in the meeting room, watching the live broadcast on a wall-mounted screen. As arrest made in cold case, after 27 years, scrolled across, she exhaled softly. Not relief, but the release of something long suppressed. The GBI Atlanta interrogation room, deep in the headquarters basement, was barely 10 square meters, with pale gray walls, a cold metal table, and fluorescent lights glaring overhead. No windows, no clock, just the steady hum of the air conditioner, like a stifled heartbeat. Daniel Lee Harris sat alone at the table, wrists still marked by handcuffs, staring into the void ahead. Behind the two-way mirror, Claire Donovan and prosecutor Douglas Harlan observed. Beside them, a technician checked the recording equipment. 2 hours had passed since Harris was brought in. He hadn't spoken, hadn't looked at anyone, only occasionally rubbing his hands together, as if trying to wash away something time couldn't erase. Claire sighed, saying quietly to Harlan, he knows silence is his last defense. He's ex-Marine, trained to withstand interrogation. Harlan replied, voice low, but no one can withstand their own truth forever. She nodded slightly, stepping out of the observation room, clutching the thick file. As the interrogation room door opened, Harris looked up, his cloudy eyes flickering with a hint of recognition. Claire pulled out a chair across from him, set the file on the table, and spoke calmly. Mr. Harris, I'm Agent Donovan. I just want to hear your story in your own words. No traps, no tricks. I know you're not young anymore, and I believe, at this age, people fear carrying guilt to the grave more than they fear the law. Sarah stayed silent, his eyes tracking the slow movements of her hands. Claire opened the file, pulling out a faded Athens Herald article and a 1975 photo of Mary Ellen Carter. She placed it in front of him. She was a good person, she said softly. Everyone says so. And I think you knew that better than anyone. Harris stared at the photo for a long time. His shoulders trembled slightly, then stiffened. The room sank into a heavy, lingering silence. Claire didn't push. She knew time was the only thing that could soften a hardened soul. At minute 127, as the air conditioner's hum blended with their breathing, Claire spoke softly, almost a whisper. We have DNA, Daniel. From the 1975 scene. It matches you perfectly. Unmistakably. 1 in 17 trillion. No one else could be that person but you. The words landed like a silent blade. Harris closed his eyes, head bowed. For a long moment, only his heavy breathing filled the room. Then he spoke, voice hoarse, trembling, as if he himself was surprised to hear it. I just wanted her to love me. I didn't mean to kill. Claire said nothing. She only slid the recorder closer. That night, Harris began, eyes still down. I went to her house. I just wanted to apologize. I'd helped her fix the electricity a few times. I thought there was something between us, but she kept her distance, polite, cold. When I heard she was moving away, I felt like I was losing everything. I drank, then drove over. Her lights were still on. I knocked. She opened, wearing pajamas, holding a glass of water. He paused, inhaling deeply. I said I just wanted to talk. She didn't want me inside, but I stepped in. She said, Danny, you should go. I said I couldn't. I told her I needed her. She yelled, told me to leave. His hands clenched, knuckles white. She pushed me away. I grabbed her arm. Then it all happened so fast. I don't know what I was doing. I just remember her screaming. I thought if she'd be quiet, I could make her understand. I grabbed the clothesline from the chair, and then I pulled. The room grew heavy. The hallway clock's ticking seemed to slow. She stopped moving. Harris continued. I let go. I thought she was just unconscious. I tried to shake her awake, but she wasn't breathing. I panicked. I wiped my hands, the glass, the table. I pulled the blanket over her, then left through the back door. His voice broke on the last sentence. He bowed his head lower, shoulders shaking, tears dripping onto the metal table. I didn't mean to kill her. I swear, I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to understand me. Claire looked at him, a mix of pity and revulsion rising within. Part of him was still that lonely young man, but another part, the dark one, had taken an innocent woman's life because she rejected him. She asked softly, Did you know her 2 kids were in the house that night? Harris froze, looking up, face pale. Kids? Yes, Claire replied. They were sleeping in the next room. One woke up hearing her scream, but was too scared to come out. Harris covered his face with his hands, trembling. I didn't know, I swear. I didn't know. Behind the mirror, Harlan scribbled quickly. Confession made, motive, emotional rejection, sequence consistent with evidence. The technician confirmed the recorder was working, every word captured. Claire leaned forward, voice soft but cold. You cleaned the scene, then drove away. Why park the truck near the house again? Harris answered, almost unconsciously, I was scared someone saw me by the lake. I thought if I parked it closer to home, they'd think someone else did it. I didn't know what I was doing. That whole night, I just drove. Can't even remember the way back. Claire nodded, noting every word. Then you lived 27 years, like nothing happened. Harris gave a weak laugh. Not nothing. I heard her every night. Sometimes in the church, while cleaning the floors, I heard someone say my name. I knew one day she'd find a way to bring you all to me." The room fell silent again. Claire stood, looking straight at him. "You're right, Daniel, she found a way. Through DNA, through memory, through the patience of those who never forgot her." Harris looked up. Eyes sunken, voice barely a whisper. "What do you write in your report, Agent Donovan?" Claire closed the file, replying, "The truth, Mr. Harris. Just the truth. And it's waited long enough." She left the room, leaving him alone under the white light. As the door closed, Harris sat there, staring at his trembling hands, muttering something indistinct. Maybe a prayer, maybe remorse, or just the echo of 27 years of silence, breaking in a cold room where justice finally took shape. 2 days after Harris's confession, Thursday morning, May 9, 2002, GBI Atlanta's headquarters glowed under the lights of dozens of news crews. The front yard teemed with reporters, microphones raised, cameras humming. A large sign by the press podium read in bold, 1975 Athens, homicide solved by DNA evidence. The event was announced for 10 a.m., but local and state media had arrived early. Live broadcasts aired on major channels: WSB-TV, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, WXIA 11 Alive. A 27-year-old case, thought buried in the past, was revived, not by rumors or memories, but by clear, cold, irrefutable science. In the auditorium, Claire Donovan stood beside GBI Director James Whitfield and Clark County Prosecutor Douglas Harlan. Camera flashes flared non-stop. Whitfield's voice carried through the microphone, slow, deep, and firm. After more than 27 years, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation confirms the murder of teacher Mary Ellen Carter on July 16, 1975, in Athens, has been solved through modern DNA technology. Suspect Daniel Lee Harris, 55, was arrested in Gainesville and has confessed to the crime. Camera shutters clicked like rainfall. He continued, "This is not just a victory for technology, but for patience, for those who believe justice never expires. We especially commend the efforts of Agent Claire Donovan, who reopened the Carter file and pursued it to the end." Claire bowed her head slightly. She didn't smile, only felt her throat tighten as the words echoed. Harlan stepped forward, adding, "Harris was questioned in 1975, but released for lack of evidence. Now DNA testing confirms he left biological material at the scene, matching with a probability of 1 in 17 trillion. He confessed on record, detailing his actions. We will prosecute him for first-degree murder." Hands shot up below. An Athens Herald reporter called out, "Is it true Harris, the man who worked at Gainesville's Baptist Church, was the suspect?" Harlan nodded. "Yes, it's him." Another reporter cut in. "Athens remembers Harris helping clean the school grounds, even attending Mary Ellen Carter's funeral. How could someone like that live among us for nearly 3 decades, unnoticed?" Claire looked up, answering briefly, "Because we forgot, and he learned to live like a shadow." The room's atmosphere grew heavy. Reporters' faces shifted from professional curiosity to shock. Outside, news channels ran tickers. Arrest in 1975, Athens murder, beloved teacher's case solved by DNA. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, papers from Savannah to Macon, Augusta, even Washington, picked up the story. In Athens, the sheriff's office phones rang non-stop. Callers, voices trembling, asked, "Is it really Danny Harris, the guy who swept the church, watched kids at Sunday school?" Some cried upon confirmation. At downtown Delhi near the university, a former teacher and student hangout, patrons stopped eating as the news played on TV, Harris in handcuffs, passing the camera. An elderly woman covered her mouth, whispering, "My God, Danny, I invited him in for water. He held my kid." Another man shook his head, "No way. Hey guy, that quiet." But the next images, Harris escorted, the GBI director reading DNA results, silenced them. The press conference ended with a moment no one in the room forgot. As Whitfield thanked the media and prepared to leave, the back door opened. 2 people entered, a man and woman, mid-30s. Unintroduced, but recognized from screen photos, Mary Ellen Carter's children. Sarah Carter clutched her brother Paul's hand, both walking to the front row. No one spoke, and camera shutters stopped. As flashes dimmed, the room fell silent. Sarah bowed her head, tears falling quietly. Paul wrapped an arm around her, whispering something microphones didn't catch. Harlan stepped down, handing them a copy of the official prosecution order. "Justice won't bring her back," he said softly. "But today, at least her name is spoken again, not as a victim, but as someone given back her truth." The press didn't photograph that moment. No one clapped. Only the air conditioner's hum and faint sniffles from the audience filled the room. As the conference ended, Claire stepped outside, Atlanta's bright sun hitting the steps. She saw the Carter siblings standing together, silent. Sarah approached, grasping Claire's hand, voice choked. "Thank you for not forgetting my mother." Claire replied softly, "No one deserves to be forgotten, Sarah. Sometimes, justice just takes a detour." In the distance, camera flashes flared again, reporters delivering live updates. After 27 years, justice returns to Athens. In that moment, amid the city's noise and blazing sunlight, Claire knew the case wasn't just a file stamped solved. It was living proof that justice could be slow, but never lost its way. August 2002, nearly 3 months after the press conference that shook the state of Georgia versus Daniel Lee Harris was officially scheduled for trial in Clark County Superior Court. The trial date was set for the following year, but preparations began immediately. The second-floor file room at the county prosecutor's office became a storm of paperwork, forensic reports, audio recordings, interrogation transcripts, DNA results, witness statements, all reorganized, numbered, sealed, and cross-checked. Douglas Harlan, lead prosecutor, knew this wasn't just a reopened old case. It was a test of Georgia's justice system. One small error in procedure, one gap in the evidence chain, could unravel nearly 3 decades of effort. "We're fighting not just for a woman who's gone," he said at the first meeting with the investigation team, "but for the belief that justice still exists, even after human memory fades." On the table, the evidence list was meticulously detailed, 42 physical items to present to the jury, including the white clothesline, red fiber, sealed 1975 biological sample vial, 2001 DNA comparison results, shoe print photos, type O blood records, and the recorded confession. Each item came with a certificate of intact preservation, something the prosecution knew the defense would try to attack. The witness list included 16 names from original investigators like forensic pathologist Dr. Carol Keaton to civilian witnesses like Edna Walker and new GBI forensic technicians. Last on the list was Claire Donovan, the investigator who reopened the case and secured the confirming DNA evidence. While Prosecutor Harlan prepared every detail, the defense, led by seasoned Atlanta attorney Robert Langford, built its own strategy. In his first court filing, Langford moved to dismiss some evidence due to its antiquated nature and lack of guaranteed integrity. He argued the case's age weakened it. Key witnesses were elderly, memories faded. Relying on new DNA technology to convict was an infringement on fair trial principles, because my client cannot rebut a process he doesn't understand and wasn't present to oversee. In a brief press conference, Langford told reporters, "Daniel Harris is a Marine veteran. He served in Vietnam, came back with untreated PTSD. His entire life has been a nightmare, and now they want to turn that nightmare into guilt." But Harlan remained unshaken. In an Atlanta Journal-Constitution interview, he said simply, "Justice can be delayed, but never lost. Science doesn't forget, and victims deserve to be heard, even after nearly 30 years of silence." Throughout fall 2002, Claire Donovan worked relentlessly. She traveled between Atlanta and Athens, meeting each witness, reviewing old statements. Edna Walker, 73, and frail but sharp, agreed to testify. She told Claire, "I can't bring her back, but but I can tell the jury I saw his truck that night. One major challenge was ensuring the evidence chain's integrity. Every bag had to prove it was preserved continuously, untampered since 1975. GBI technicians retrieved original sealing records, photographing Dr. Carol Keaton's and Sheriff Wes Grant's signatures. Remarkably, everything remained intact, as if those in 1975 knew their work would one day be revisited. One November night, in a still-lit office, Claire found a folded document at the bottom of the file, a 1976 handwritten letter from Wes Grant to GBI. Its last line reading, "If someone patient enough reads this one day, please finish what's left undone." She paused, then placed the letter in an envelope with the official file. On December 15th, the pre-trial hearing convened. Langford persisted, "This is a trial of the past, not the present. How can we convict someone when evidence has been stored for 27 years, while witnesses are frail and memories faded?" Harlan stood, facing the judge. "Your Honor, evidence doesn't fade, and while memories may blur, science does not. The defendant's DNA speaks for everything he hid. If the law only protects those who wait until witnesses die, we no longer have justice." The courtroom fell silent. The judge nodded, striking the gavel. Motion denied. The case proceeds to trial. The trial was set for November 3, 2003. As Claire left the room, she met Harlan in the hallway. He smiled, tired but warm. "See," he said, 30 years can't erase a crime, as long as someone keeps looking." Claire replied softly, gazing at the cold rain outside, "And as long as someone believes in science and faith." In the distance, Athens courthouse bell rang, echoing through the gray air. After nearly 30 years, Mary Ellen Carter's case was heading to light, where justice would face time, and a man could no longer flee his past. Clark County Courthouse, November 2003. After over a year of preparation, State of Georgia vet. Daniel Lee Harris finally went to public trial. The red brick courthouse in downtown Athens blazed with media lights. Below the steps, dozens of reporters crowded, satellite trucks filling the square. For Athens residents, this wasn't just a trial, it was a second funeral, where justice held a memorial for a woman gone 28 years. Inside, courtroom 2 was packed. In the front row sat Mary Ellen Carter's children, Sarah and Paul, holding hands, silent. Across, Daniel Lee Harris, 56, in a white shirt and khakis, gaunt and pale, stared at the table, avoiding the gallery. Beside him was attorney Robert Langford, steadfast in his argument. His client was a victim of a legal process stretched by time. At 9 a.m., Judge Jonathan Reeves struck the gavel, opening the trial. The case of the State of Georgia versus defendant Daniel Lee Harris, charge, first-degree murder. The jury of 12 has been sworn. The wood-sharp rap rang out, closing a chapter too long in Athens history. Prosecutor Douglas Harlan stepped to the podium, opening with a low, deliberate, but resolute voice. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, this is the case of a woman robbed of her life in her own home on a summer night in 1975. A case that time seemed to have swallowed until science spoke. Today, the evidence will speak for her." He turned to the technician, display Exhibit 1. On the large courtroom screen, the crime scene appeared. A small bedroom, dim light, a crumpled blanket, a white clothesline draped across the neck of a young woman lying face down. The auditorium fell silent. Sarah Carter bowed her head, hands clenched tightly. "This is the crime scene of Mary Ellen Carter," Harlan continued. "The evidence was collected by the Georgia State Forensic Team in 1975. This sample, ladies and gentlemen, was preserved intact for 27 years, in near-perfect condition." At the witness stand, Dr. Lionel Webb, GBI forensic expert, stood. He spoke with a scientific yet warm tone. The samples were sealed in paper bags, stored in a temperature-controlled archive in Atlanta. This unintentionally but precisely kept the DNA from degrading. When retested in 2001, using STR technology, we extracted a complete male genetic profile. That profile matched Daniel Lee Harris's DNA, collected in 1989, perfectly. Defense attorney Langford stood to object. Your Honor, 27 years is too long to ensure an unbroken chain of custody. Webb responded calmly. We have full documentation of every handling, each box opening recorded with signatures and timestamps. Not once was it compromised. Time doesn't alter DNA, sir. A soft "oh" rose from the audience. Judge Reeves called for order. That afternoon, witness Edna Walker took the stand. At 74, with white hair and slow steps, her voice remained clear. The courtroom hushed as she recounted that fateful 1975 morning. I heard a scream, a woman's scream, piercing the night, heart-wrenching. When I looked out, the Carter door was ajar, the radio still playing. I ran over, called her name, no answer. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and saw Mary lying there. Everything in me stopped. Her voice choked. Prosecutor Harlan gently asked, "Did you notice anything unusual outside the scene?" She nodded. Yes, a brown Ford truck, parked by the fence, with a dent on the left side. I remember it clearly. Later, I heard it was his truck. She pointed, trembling, at Harris. He bowed his head, avoiding her gaze. Langford tried to weaken her testimony. Mrs. Walker, it's been nearly 30 years. Are you sure your memory isn't affected? She replied calmly. You may forget many things, sir, but not the morning you saw your neighbor dead by her door. The room fell silent. Finally, the prosecution played the confession tape. Lights dimmed. Harris's voice filled the speakers, hoarse, tired, but clear. I just wanted her to love me. I didn't mean to kill. I thought she was just unconscious. I got scared. I cleaned the place and left. Each sentence deepened the courtroom silence. No whispers, no camera clicks. Sarah Carter covered her mouth, tears falling quietly. Paul gripped her shoulder, head bowed. Harlan turned to the jury. That's his voice, uncoerced, unscripted. He described the scene, the evidence, exactly. Only the perpetrator would know those details. Langford didn't object, rising slowly. My client doesn't deny being there, but he suffered severe psychological issues post-war. He didn't intend to kill and wasn't aware of his actions' consequences. But Harlan's voice rang out, closing the first day. Intent or not, she died by his hands. 2 children grew up without a mother. For nearly 30 years, he had the chance to tell the truth. But he chose silence. Now science has spoken for her. As the judge called a recess, the jury remained seated. Many bowed their heads, avoiding the victim's photo on the screen. Outside, Athens drizzled, rain falling on the old courthouse roof. Each drop like a tick of time. 28 years gone, and justice at last being named. On November 18, 2003, after 4 days of continuous trial, Judge Jonathan Reeves declared the arguments closed. The Clark County Courthouse courtroom remained packed, as heavy as the first day. Now every word had been spoken, every piece of evidence presented, and Daniel Lee Harris's fate rested with 12 people, 8 women, 4 men, the Clark County jury. At 11:20 a.m., they were led to the deliberation room. The door closed, leaving behind a thick, lingering silence, heavy as time's dust. In that room, ordinary citizens bore the weight of 28 years past, deciding if an aging man deserved to carry his guilt to death. Outside, Claire Donovan sat in the hallway, holding a cold coffee, staring at the tiled floor. Beside her, Prosecutor Douglas Harlan flipped through notes, not to read, but to avoid the clock. Time stretched, cruelly slow. Further down, Sarah and Paul Carter sat silently. No one spoke, but all heard in their minds the scream Edna Walker described, Mary Ellen's cry tearing through the night, never fading. In the deliberation room, the jury reviewed crime scene photos, the confession tape, DNA charts. A middle-aged woman said softly, "There's no room for doubt. DNA doesn't lie." A man replied, "I pity him, but pity can't replace justice." They voted, one by one, slowly, decisively. 6 hours later, at 5:27 p.m., the bailiff knocked 3 times. signaling the jury had a verdict. The building held its breath. Everyone returned to the courtroom. Harris was led in, hands cuffed in front, face pale but oddly calm. He sat, looking at the floor, avoiding all eyes. Claire, at the prosecution's bench, quietly gripped her pen. Judge Reeves struck the gavel. The court will hear the jury's verdict in the case of State of Georgia versus Daniel Lee Harris. The clerk stood, reading the verdict clearly, each word echoing off the courtroom's stone walls. We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Lee Harris, guilty on all counts: murder in the first degree, burglary, and obstruction of justice. Murmurs rose, then silenced instantly. Sarah Carter doubled over, hands covering her face, tears streaming. Paul gripped her shoulder, eyes red but dry. Claire inhaled deeply, feeling her chest release after years of pent-up weight. Judge Reeves asked the jury, "Is this your unanimous verdict?" The foreperson stood, voice trembling but firm. "Yes, Your Honor. Unanimous." The judge nodded, his voice slow but resolute. "Daniel Lee Harris, the court hereby sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. May this verdict bring closure to the family of Mary Ellen Carter and serve as a reminder that justice, though delayed, is never denied." No one in the room stirred. Harris sat, eyes down, hands neatly on the table. As an officer touched his shoulder to stand, he said softly, almost inaudible, "I thought I'd buried it." Claire heard. She watched as he was led out, his hunched figure, heavy steps, afternoon light glinting off his gray hair through iron bars. In that moment, she saw no monster, just a man rotting from his past, imprisoned by his own guilt before the sentence was read. Outside the courthouse, a crowd waited. As the doors opened, cheers mixed with sobs erupted. Reporters swarmed with cameras. That evening's ticker on Atlanta Journal Live read simply, "Vietnam veteran convicted in 1975, cold case." Reporter Jessica Dean's article opened. After 28 years, Athens has finally heard the end of a case that seemed to have become legend. Daniel Lee Harris, 56, Marine veteran, was sentenced to life without parole for the 1975 murder of teacher Mary Ellen Carter. DNA technology brought justice back to a place time had forgotten. That night, in a small hotel room near the courthouse, Claire sat alone by the window, looking at the lit-up street. She opened the notebook that had followed her journey, writing a final line. Verdict, guilty on all counts. Justice delayed, not denied. Then she closed it, exhaling. Below, the street buzzed, but somewhere in Athens' memory, a name ceased haunting like an open wound. Justice couldn't revive Mary Ellen Carter, but it made a small town believe again that truth may be slow, but it always arrives. The story of Mary Ellen Carter isn't just a personal tragedy in Athens, Georgia, 1975. It reflects a part of America today where justice sometimes moves slowly but endures, thanks to human faith and persistence. In a modern society where everything moves fast and we demand instant results, this case reminds us that truth takes time to be seen. Nearly 30 years of silence, an old clothesline, and a small glass vial became proof that nothing truly vanishes if someone keeps believing and searching. From Claire Donovan, we see the new generation of Americans blending compassion with science, human emotion with technological reason. She turned silent evidence into a voice. It's a reminder that justice, in the technological age, lives not just in courtrooms, but in the hands and hearts of those who refuse to give up. From Daniel Harris, we see the shadow of those carrying trauma, veterans, forgotten after war, drifting in modern America. His silence warns us, if we don't care for wounded souls, they can become tragedies for communities. Thus, the lesson isn't just justice will come, but listen, with science, with humanity, with memory. For in Georgia, though justice slept a lifetime, when it awoke, it found the right person to answer. If you believe justice, though slow, will arrive, subscribe to the channel to join me in exploring cases thought forgotten, but still waiting to speak. Thank you for joining. See you in the next story, where truth will again find its light.